Welcome to the Burn Up Podcast, where we discuss all things Agile software development and delivery.
We will be giving you an honest take on tools and techniques. We'll share our experiences, debunk myth, and hopefully provide needed inspiration.
Hi, I'm Todd Anderson, Consultant Delivery Manager. I've done just about every job in IT, from tech support, programmer, network security, project and program management. I can't say I've done everything, but I've seen a lot.
And I'm Marcel Bridge, digital consultant, business analyst and product owner. I've worked in digital before this even had a name, and since have been quite a bit around the block. And this is my way of giving back to the industry.
So sit back, relax, and settle in for this week's episode.
Welcome to the Burn Up. Today we'll be talking about values alignment.
Yeah, and if you don't have time to listen to the whole episode, a few key takeaways from this episode are it's really important to align on a common set of values early in a project. Don't just pay lip service to values. You actually have to put them into practice. Don't throw values out the door as soon as deadlines get tight. And bad things happen when values are misaligned. So, how are values surfaced?
So, remember when we did our last project inception together? I remember you doing this thing, which I think you call project sliders. And I hadn't done this before, but I thought it was a really good way to tease out values the clients had and then see how the values we would like as an external supplier to be applied to the project to align. And also check a little bit of whether the client who wanted agile delivery actually was really up for agile delivery. So can you explain to our listeners a little bit like what project sliders are and how you go about eliciting values, basically?
Yeah, you may need to Google just to get a visual, but basically what project sliders are is you have sort of different metrics. So, the standard ones are sort of time, budget, quality.
I remember on that project we had innovation in there.
Innovation, yeah.
I think we had security, performance. So some of the non-functional requirements sometimes come into this. Speed to market was one aspect, but the other was like internal buy-in of users into the software that was delivered. So these could be dimensions that are in any shape or form important.
Yeah,
right?
And usually you start out with sort of a standard set, like I say, the standard, time scope, budget type thing. But then you invite the participants of the workshop to sort of say what are other dimensions that are important that you value.
Yeah. And
then once you do that, you basically plot them out as lines on a piece of paper. You have to basically rank order all those dimensions. So it's either budget that's more important. You can't put one on both budget and time and scope or whatever. You have to choose. And it's a really interesting process because I think the feedback from clients is that it actually makes them think about it. Like what is actually really important to that? And
because the default reaction is right that everything is important.
Yeah, everything's important, right?
Always, right? And they want to be innovative, they want to be cheap, they want to be tomorrow life, and they want it secure and pretty and everything, right? And we know that's not true, right?
Yeah, and if everything's important, then nothing's important, right?
Correct.
It makes it really hard to make those tough decisions. When crunch time comes around, I think it's a really valuable way to start that dialogue with clients about values. It's something that you can go back and reference later when you're sort of having tough conversations, and you can say, like, look, back in inception, your discovery phase, you said, that budget was the most important thing, so should we, ramp up the team or something like that rather to meet this date or should we, what is what's the decision here?
I think it's important what we said earlier, that this being an agile mindseted team, it's of course allowable to change these things over time, but they still give you a baseline to make decisions on. It's your decision-making framework, right? It allows you to prioritize features, to prioritize or to evaluate decisions. As you say, do I ramp up a team or not? Or I remember working on a project where the client said they wanted to be innovative, and it was the most important thing for them. And we realized that what they meant was that innovation for them meant doing new things within the organization.
Okay.
They didn't mean being innovative within the industry, and that is an interesting realization because your budget that you have to spend is much, much smaller, of course, as if you have to do R&D on an industry-wide scale, right?
Right.
So understanding what these different dimensions mean and how important they are, that really puts a lot of context on everything you do.
The slider thing gives you a vehicle to have those, to start those conversations, right? And that's important when you're early engagement. You want to understand what you're getting into, what you're doing, and I think the interesting thing too about that workshop is that this is all about surfacing the client's values, right? So this, like, one indication is, do they even have values, and what are they? And like just the interaction of this workshop sort of gives you an indication of like, well, wait a minute, do these guys even care about values? Do they have a strong set of values, which is interesting in its own right? And there's different ways to go about it. And if they don't have any values at all, that's also kind of a red flag. It's something that you might need to address early on.
And I think this is a really interesting point you just said there, because you're eliciting the client's values, but at the same time, you then, of course, want to overlay your values if you're an external supplier, because we come in with, I would say, highly agile values, and we have certain values of high transparency, low hierarchy, empower teams, etc., etc., high communication, collaboration. If those are your values, the client might say, this is exactly what we want in the organization. But then once you start working with them, you realize that maybe their InfoSec department or their infrastructure team are working very, very old school, and they can't support those values at all. And there is nothing wrong with that, but you need to realize that there is a misalignment, and then you need to decide, do you change your values or do you transform either side to align on those values? The risk is if you don't do that, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess maybe there's a good time to talk about what do we think a good set of values are, or at least values that we've come across on recent projects that typically, we come into we get asked to come into an organization to build some software. With that usually comes a set of values. At least with the teams I've been working with more recently, we have a pretty strong set of values.
Yes, definitely.
I think, I
think we're quite arrogant in opinion.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of, that also might be part of the problem. But I think we're really opinionated about things, and we want to do things quote quote the right way.
Yes.
But that is the right way. Is there such a thing? I don't know.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the values that are commonly held by teams like ours. Do you have a good indication?
Yeah, so I think the things I would say as a product owner or business analyst, I would say for me it is about delivering value early, mitigating risk, high degrees of collaboration, doing the right thing for the client, for the end user, doing only what's really needed, what's really valuable, empowered teams, transparency, honesty, high empathy within our teams, quality, super important, right? Doing things, that software that works, that's maintainable, anything.
Yeah. So, I mean, the project management side is sort of like, you want to know that they actually value the project, that the product that you're building, and not just like, shoving any old crap out there into the world just so they can, meet a deadline or whatnot. That's one thing, that you want them to care about the project as much as you do. But
it's an interesting one. Let's just stay on this, because I've come across a number of projects in my career where we came in and as external suppliers, we're like, oh, this is a really cool project. We want to build the shit out of this. This is the most beautiful thing to build. And we're building this perfect solution. And then we realized that the client wasn't actually interested in that perfect solution at all. They either just needed something that fit the budget, or they needed a short-term stopgap, or maybe they just wanted something to please someone in the organization. So our good wasn't necessarily their good. So we were, in some cases, very frustrated because we were delivering this beautiful solution and the client wasn't even impressed by it. It showed that we didn't understand the values.
Yeah, but just to go back briefly to common values that, so there's the product and the project management sort of values, but there's also usually a pretty strong set of technical values as well.
Yes.
So these are things like continuous delivery, TDD, test first development, having automated testing, having a really strong pipeline, code's developed at a high quality goes through automated testing and a rigorous QA process, and goes through various environments and things like that.
But would you agree that that is quite, because these techniques and technologies are quite new, and they're quite cutting edge still for many organizations. So again, us coming in and saying, this is the right way of doing it. You need your CI/CD pipeline. You need 500 releases every day, etc., etc. Look at the Amazons and the Spotifys. That's not right for every client, and maybe not even possible for every client, right? So again, would you say we need to be quite careful there with what a client can do?
Yeah, it's interesting. To your point earlier, it says, if that's not what the client needs, can you really say that value is the right thing? And I mean, it's an interesting thing because, ultimately quality is that kind of overarching value that I think is left to the development team. It's like they're responsible for quality. Yeah. They have to put their name on it, and they're the ones that have to get something out the door.
I remember a professor at uni who defined quality as fit for purpose. And then the question was, what is the purpose of this, right? So if the purpose is that it's a stopgap product for a year or something, you may not need to build it massively extensively because you're throwing it away. Now, we know in reality these things get built and then they live on forever, so that's a different thing. But if this is a product where the client is going to extend it and sell it on to other clients of theirs, etc., then you might want to build this far more extensively and maintainably. So the fit for purpose, I think, is a really good analogy, but you need to understand what the purpose and the objectives are, and then you adjust your values accordingly.
Yeah, let's dig into this values misalignment a little bit more. So we've all been on that project, right, where the deadline's fast approaching, and there's a lot of pressure on development teams to sort of like get that thing out the door. Start cutting corners or whatever, and suddenly you're not doing the ceremonies, you're not doing showcases, you're not doing retros, you're trying to squeeze every single minute of the day out to try to meet that deadline. What does it look like when a team starts falling into that values misalignment?
I think what you see is, you see two things on the coding side. I think you see a lot of code debt. You just see that there is stuff you need to do later, and that stuff is becoming more and more and more. It's this big mountain, and you're pushing that mountain in front of you, and that's an anti-pattern in lean. On the other hand, what you see is, I think you see demotivation and frustration in the team because they're forced to do the wrong thing, to not work in the right way, and no one really likes that. No craftsman or craftswoman or good software person likes that, I think.
Yeah, I think they feel a little slimy, a little sort of like they're cutting corners that sort of compromising their values.
Feels like you need to wash your brain, right?
Actually, this is an interesting topic. It's not always that it's just clients and teams have values, but actually you have people have values, right? Like there's certain red lines that I don't think I want to cross. Yep. Sometimes you do have to do things for practical purposes, but as long as you're not sort of sleepwalking into a disaster and really compromising what you're doing.
I think it is this thing you just said that you're not sleepwalking into it, and that you're not kind of contributing to it beyond reason. So I think this is about over communicating, to say to the client, okay, we can do this, but this is the impact later down the line, and this is what we will then need to do afterwards to rectify the situation. The problem with that is, of course, that quite often everyone's like, I will give you time to solve the problems later, but you never get that time because another deadline comes, and this is a problem we have both seen on many projects where everyone is trying to do their best, and then the deadline comes, you compromise, and then there's another deadline, and you keep on compromising, and then at some point you're a bit in deep shit, and then you have to backpedal, and it's just hard. I don't think there's a real solution for this apart from just constantly being mindful of that problem, right?
Constantly being mindful and vocal about it, right?
Yes.
Like, if it, I think it's, again, to avoid that sort of sleepwalk situation where it's like, okay, I compromise this one thing. Well, if I go a little further and I compromise this other thing, then I'll meet that goal. And if I compromise this other thing yet, then I'll meet that goal. And then suddenly you just realize it's unrecognizable, right? So I think it is important to have those sort of team members that can voice their concerns and be able to speak up and say, we're not doing the right thing here. Like, what is the plan to start doing the right thing again? And then clearly communicating that back to the client, and it can be uncomfortable, but it's also it's also important because, I think as long as everybody's motivation is sort of pure, like everybody wants to have a good quality product out that's operable and maintainable and things like that, then I think if it's done with the best intention, not just sort of like, people throwing their toys out of the pram. Sorry, that's a very British phrase. Then I think it's important to always keep that pressure up. Like, are we doing the right thing? Are we doing the right thing? And really keep track of that.
And I think this is a bit about professional ethics, right? How much are you prepared to compromise? Are you doing the thing because it's really needed at this point in time, or are you just doing it to cut corners? And I think there is a big difference. I must also say, however, that I have seen, and this is again coming back to what we were discussing earlier, misalignment between teams I work with and clients where we hadn't realized that our level of good was much, much higher than what the client expected, needed, could support. So what we were giving the client was totally happy and totally satisfied with it, and it was the right thing for the client. We still felt we had underperformed because we were so far advanced. So it's basically like, we were thinking we're building the client comes to us and says, we want to be like Netflix. Like, yes, we can build you that. No problem, sir. So we're building all these cool tools and techniques in, and we'll give them the most amazing infrastructure. And then we realize actually that the client doesn't even need that. If we give them half of it, we're then frustrated and depressed because we haven't achieved our goal, totally missing the point that the client never wanted that goal in the first place.
Right. I think that's probably the biggest thing with values misalignment is that, does the customer even want to pay for some of that stuff, right? Yes. Like, because you value, some of these things, continuous delivery or whatever. Like, does the customer even want to pay for that value? And if you never had that conversation, you just never know.
Yeah.
It's always just assumed that, the client is aligned with your values and that but maybe at the end of the day, they don't want the Cadillac of solutions, but they just need the practical thing to get the job done.
Yes.
I often find that that's what happens later on in a project if you don't sort of bring the stuff up with the client, is that there's this misalignment and then suddenly going in different directions because you're trying to do this thing that meets your values, but you never communicated that back, and the client's just sort of like, why are you doing this? I didn't ask for this,
It's a really good point. I think an important point here is also that what you said you do the first time you do this value alignment or value understanding activity in inception, so very early on. But of course, as you only get to know the client really as you go along the project. So 6 months down the line, you may actually understand that the client has actually totally different values because it's all in the words, right? To say they're interested in quality, in innovation.
Right.
And you only understand that later. And then also you may understand, the more you get to know the client, where they're actually coming from. So sometimes we see values at clients where we're like, this is totally ridiculous. How can they work like this? Why are they pushing back on all the things we want to do? And then you realize when you understand the client better that there are actually sometimes very, very good reasons why people behave in a certain way. People usually behave for a reason.
Yeah.
In the way they do. And once we understand that, we can then either change this or communicate it to our teams, and then our teams understand why maybe they need to do things in what they may think is a suboptimal way. But they're like, yeah, but I understand why this is the right thing in this situation, and therefore I'm happy to do it.
Yeah. Right.
I think what we wanted to talk about is so when we're in a situation of values misalignment, what's the thing of getting out of it, or how do we align values? What do you do as a delivery lead?
There's a few different things you can do. From a technical perspective, I think a lot of people agree that you should bake quality into the story. So any refactoring that has to happen, things to make something production ready, should be part of that story before it goes into production.
Agreed. So you build quality in as you go, right?
Which means you need to estimate for that, and you need to take that into estimate. And that's a good thing to do. It's hard to maintain. I think the other thing I've heard teams do also is sort of like they'll have like sprints, like entire sprints, like every maybe fourth or fifth sprint or whatever. They'll say that this entire sprint is just for the team to make an improvement.
This is actually an important point. I know that a lot of people say these fixing or empty sprints are not good because they're an anti-pattern for you to build up code that then you want to clean it up later, but you never get the time to clean it up because you are then expected to do features in those cleanup sprints. But I think they're actually good because they give the team time and breathing space, not only to improve the code base, but also to reflect on their ways of working.
And
right?
And actually sit down and think about like, what is it that's broken here? What is it that we need attention on? Because you're going to be, let's put it bluntly, like you're going to be working on this stuff anyways, right? It's either going to be, through necessity because your system just tanked because you release something that's not quite up to snuff. And then suddenly now you're in an emergency mode and you're just sort of like, forget about features. We're just going to spend the next 3 months fixing stuff because, so you either do it in a controlled fashion, where you can plan for it, where it's kind of part of the BAU running of the team.
Tangible outcome that's then action.
And people can understand it's a little more transparent. You can plan for it a little bit better.
Yeah.
Or you end up doing it as an emergency measure, in which case that's embarrassing for everybody.
And
clients
really,
get affected. Yeah. And, this is just, it's just a bad situation. But,
one thing I wanted to say in addition to this is, so you've spoken about like specifically values around the code base and stuff. I think more subtle values or cultural values, I think there is a good way of aligning on those so what we do quite often is that we bring in a small team initially and then extend this team by adding colleagues or talent from the client side into that team. Or generally speaking, we ramp up our team slowly, and that allows cultural values to kind of diffuse across people.
Right.
Rather than bringing 100 people on board right on the first day, I think it's much better to have a scrum team of 8 to 10 people, and then you slowly add additional people to this, and then this team working very well shows other people how it's done, how these things work, and you get like an organic kind of transformation of values, which in my experience has worked extremely well.
I'm a big fan of co-locating, clients and consultants together rather than having just like one consultant team trying to do the right thing and everybody putting that down like, look, they're doing something different and it's good, but we don't know how to do it.
I think you can align a lot of this towards the right way in terms of like, the key thing here is really you want to do something valuable, right? So when you focus the client away from just looking at requirements or money in isolation, but focusing the client on what does actually deliver value to the business or to users. So taking a user-centric perspective in light maybe with business strategy and objectives, that can focus your ways of working onto alignment quite strongly. So you say to the client, you should only be doing these things or you should be doing them in a specific way if it works towards achievements of the goals you have.
Right, so it diffuses the whole
situation, Exactly. And that makes the discussion less emotional. It just makes it very actually tangible and quantifiable, really, because you wanted more sales and you wanted a system that is very secure and stable. This is the things we need to do for that.
Right. So I think we touched on a lot of good stuff here. I think, it's a lot of food for thought about talking about values. Any final thoughts? Or
I think, as you said, if you don't align them, bad things happen. And it is maybe one of the most important things to get right in a project because, everything else is eliciting requirements, building software. That's kind of the easy bit. I think the value and culture bit is the hard stuff, really, if we're honest, right? In many cases.
Yeah. You're like you say, bad stuff happens, you get it wrong. But if you get it right, really good stuff happens.
Then it's really fun to work, right? It's enjoyable.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode. Have a look at our show notes with related information and details on how to get in touch at theburnup.com. We are listener driven, so please do send us your questions, comments, and ideas for new episodes.
We're both practitioners and are happy to discuss interesting opportunities from consulting to coaching to getting involved in actual projects. For inquiries, please visit burnupmedia.com. This podcast is produced by Burnup Media Limited under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 license, which means you can share it as long as you give credit, but you cannot change it or make money of it.
Until next time, thanks again for listening and have a wonderful day.